Okay, folks, we're going to go into chapter 13, and we're going to talk about host-parasite interactions. Before we do, I just want to remind ourselves of our little species 1, species 2 interaction matrix, right? We have negative, 0, positive. That's the outcome on the outcome of the interaction on the fitness of species 1, negative, 0, positive, right? And we can break these down into 9 classes of general interactions. And what we're talking about now are still these interactions that are positive for one party, in this case the parasite, and negative for the other, in this case the host. So when we're talking about parasites, we're talking about parasites, and we're talking about hosts, right? These are net plus minus interactions. Okay, let's go back to our black marker. Net plus minus. This is the parasite. This is the host. Okay? And parasitism, your book gives like a fuzzy definition. I've been trying to track down a better definition. Your book is this like, refers to them as consumers that benefit by consuming the host, often by feeding on it. They do harm it, but not without immediately killing it, right? It's not like they're hunting and killing it. And to me, that feels like kind of mushy. I don't love it. They're like aphids can be parasites. And to me, I don't know why that doesn't ring true. But generally, your book is referring to parasitism that, like, one of the key thoughts here is that parasites rely on keeping the host alive. It's not often as fatal, right? Keeping the host alive so that they can reproduce, for example. This is especially true, for example, in parasitoids, right? Where the host needs to live for eggs to hatch and rear out and grow, right? We talked about that early in week 8. And one of the things that's interesting is that parasites are astoundingly common in nature. This is a truism of Earth. There's like, I forget what your book says, some astounding percentage of the species on Earth are parasites. And some of the reasons we think this is true is because parasites have specific hosts, right? And because of this, they need to evolve to live on the host, right? They need to evolve in that same way we talked about escape and radiate hypothesis for butterflies in the tropics. But in the case of parasites, hosts often have many, right? So you can have ringworm and tapeworm and hairworm and all these different worms living in and on you. Each of those are specific to their hosts, but you can have many. And this pattern together means that speciation happens when parasites move into a host, but hosts can host many species of parasite, and that can lead to really high diversity. Your book, I just saw the number here, estimates that like half of the species on Earth might be parasites. That's kind of interesting, right? And one of the key ideas here, especially for endoparasites, this is parasites, endoparasites, that live inside of their hosts, is that the host is the environment, right? And every host can be astoundingly different. Even tissues in a host can be different, right? Like tapeworm isn't going to live on my skin in the same way it lives and reproduces in my gut. And this leads to all kind of selective pressures that come with trade-offs that lead to host specialization, right? And this is what drives those big patterns of diversity. And so I talked about endoparasites. These are parasites that live inside of the host. Botflies, tapeworms, ringworms are on the skin, right? And there are benefits to being an endoparasite. It's very easy to eat, right? Like, especially on animals, it's very easy to eat. It's a little harder to disperse, though, right? You have to get out of your host. You either need to be, if you live in the gut, either pooped out or ripped open and passed along, right? And the other thing that's important, one of the trade-offs of being an endoparasite, is you have to overcome the immune system of the host, right? Alternatively, there are ectoparasites. These are parasites that are made out of the slime from ghosts, ectoplasm. You paying attention? No, these are parasites that live on the outside. Endo, ecto, outside parasites. Right? Sorry, folks. Getting a little slap happy here. These outside parasites have a different trade-off, right? So feeding could be harder, especially in ectoparasites of animals that have, barriers to the outside world, either exoskeletons or skin, right? But dispersal might be easier. It's much easier, for example, a mosquito to disperse among hosts than it is for a tapeworm, right? They're also exposed to the environment, right? So inside at least homeothermic animals who maintain homeostasis, endotherms have a very stable environment, right? It's a problem for an endotherm if your hosts, if you're a human parasite, if your host goes up to 110 degrees, right? But it is not out of the question that my skin could go from 110 degrees to 60 degrees quite quickly when I walk into the milk cooler at Costco or whatever, right? And so these are two broad cases of endoparasites. Some examples, endoparasites, we learned about these flukes early on in the book. We learned about Riberia. Things like tapeworms, things like hairworms, these live inside of us. Things like bot flies, right? These are flies that lay eggs into mammals, and the eggs hatch inside of us and then move out. Let's add some examples here. Bot flies, tapeworms, etc. Alternatively, ectoparasites are things like ticks, right? Ticks are extraordinarily ectoparasites here. Lice, right? There's some things at the edge, like ringworm, right, that lives on your skin, right? And so those are two broad classes. There's also parasitoids, which we talked about, and I just want to re-mention them. I'm not going to go super deep into parasitoids here, but these are especially common in wasps who lay their eggs in hosts, right? So they're sort of the bridge between carnivores and parasitism, carnivorium parasitism. They lay their eggs in a host, the egg hatches and completes some part of its life cycle inside the host, and then hatches out and usually kills the host, right? These are extraordinarily common in insect systems, which is kind of cool. Parasites broadly matter ecologically in a lot of the same ways that carnivores do, right? Or that and herbivores do, right? We talked about how these interactions, these consumptive interactions that are not parasitism but that are carnivory and herbivory, can shape ecosystem forces or ecosystem processes because of the interconnectedness of nature. And the same is true of parasites. They can shape host fitness. They can shape host population dynamics. They can shape community structure, where some species that are parasitized may not be able to outcompete co-occurring species in all the same ways that other trophic interactions do. I want you to read this section in your book, but I'm not going to belabor this point because we just talked about it. One of the coolest things, though, and I want to talk about this, is that parasites also sometimes are on the edge of diseases, right? Sometimes on the edge of diseases. So one of my favorite examples of these kind of parasites that live inside of their hosts and reproduce and then possibly kill them are insect manipulating fungi, right? Insect manipulating fungi are really cool. They're similar to the hairworm example you saw in the crickets in your book that you should read. But these insect manipulating fungi land on insects and then go inside of them, and they grow. And they grow fruiting bodies, or sometimes they don't form conidia, but they grow fruiting bodies. And then they change insect behavior in a way that changes their dispersal, right? And these are parasites that are dealing with all of the costs and benefits of being endoparasites, right? Dealing with how to get around, dealing with how to deal with environmental variation, and the costs and benefits of being an endo versus an ectoparasite. I bring it up largely because of a really cool South Florida example here. This is a paper that just came out of my lab. Let me find it. Let me pause it. I didn't share it yet. 1 second. Okay, we're back. I passed it over. Is this endoparasitic fungus, right? So this is Eriniopsis lampyriatum, and this is a fungus that lives inside of leatherwing beetles. And I was out with the FAU Herpetology Club, and we were hanging out down in Everglades National Park right here on the map. And we were taking photos of bugs, doing INAT, and found these beetles that had fungal spores on their bodies and that were clamped onto the leaves of a plant, all dead. And we found 50 or 70 of these. After a little bit of INATing and doing some research, we found out that this is a species of fungus that hadn't been observed south of Gainesville and really hadn't been observed south of North Carolina. And so we found this crazy parasite that manipulates behavior. In this case, it's a fungus, so it's, people might not call it a parasite, they might call it a disease. I sort of think of it as a parasite because the fungus benefits and the host dies, right? And we contributed to science. We wrote a paper about this that just came out, looking at these sort of host-parasite interactions and their novelty in the neotropics. So this is a really neat case And similar to the cases in your book that show that parasites actually manipulate host behavior in all sorts of crazy ways. Okay, cool. So that's the first host parasite lecture.